Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, hundreds of people keep up protests for civilian rule in Sudan as ruling generals say that they've identified who was behind a fatal crackdown on protesters earlier this month. Also, part of Ethiopia is facing months of scheduled power cuts as the government struggles to find ways to compensate for water shortages at the country's hydrometric dams. And getting about by car in Kinshasa is notoriously nightmarish. We take a look at some of the entrepreneurs targeting the country's middle class and trying to tackle the problem by making journeys, if not faster, at least more comfortable. But first, Sudan's ruling military council said that they've identified who is behind the violent crackdown on protesters earlier this month that demonstrators say left 128 dead. Ruling generals who took over after President Omar al-Bashir was ousted in April after 33 years in power say that they won't reveal who they blame for the violence because of an ongoing investigation. Protesters have said in the past that the military council is accountable for that violence. Direct talks between the two sides have collapsed, although the military did offer to restart renegotiations this week. Meanwhile, demonstrations have continued to try to force a handover to civilian power. Asma Ismail tells us more. She's in Khartoum. Asma, thanks very much for speaking to us. Now, what's your take on this alleged identification of those responsible for the fatal crackdown at the sit-in in early June?
Thank you very much. I think once the military council is not serious into investigating the obligations of those who committed the crimes earlier today, the military council sacked the prosecutor general, who made strong statements about taking over an independent investigation, which is a clear sign that there is no intention of a genuine investigation into the incident and the violence that took place during the 3rd of June. We also heard conflicting statements since the 3rd of June from the spokesperson of the military council and from a few of the generals in the council, that contradicting message over the responsibility of who committed and made the orders to disperse the sit-in.
Why aren't protest leaders taking up the military council's offer of new talks?
Yeah, the situation after the violence that occurred on June 3rd is completely different than before. There's no confidence in the military council, who was very close in approaching a deal with the leaders of the protest and the freedom and change forces on the 3rd of June, yet they took the violent disbursement. So any going back to the table of the negotiations will need even more excessive trust-building measures. That includes one, a mediator that would be agreed upon by both parties, an international mediator that would be credible for both parties, and would make sure that there are guarantees for any agreement that would be signed. 2, we are still under restrictions of lack of internet in the entire country, except few have been completely out of the service. 3, even up to today, the peaceful protests that are being organized across the country are still being dispersed as we are speaking now. The security and the rapid support forces and the police are still dispersing people and preventing people from free speech, from organizing, and from convening protests. So I don't think the environment is yet conducive, and I don't think the military council has taken measures to ensure that there is confidence that once the leaders of the protest sit on the table, that any commitments will be met with obligations, and any discussion that's put on the table, people have confidence in the military council, especially after the violence that occurred in June the 3rd.
Thanks very much. It's Asma Ismail, an activist in Khartoum, speaking to us there. Now, police and protesters have clashed across Malawi during demonstrations over the disputed results of last month's presidential vote. Thousands of people rallied in the capital, Lilongwe, in Blantyre and in Mzuzu, demanding that the head of the Electoral Commission quit. Opposition leader Lazarus Chakwera accuses President Peter Mutharika of having stolen the vote. The two main opposition parties have challenged that poll. Judges are due to rule on Friday whether or not to dismiss the case. Well, parts of Ethiopia are facing months of scheduled power cuts as the government struggles to find ways to compensate for water shortages at the country's hydrometric dams. Electricity exports will also be suspended. However, some critical services will still get a constant supply of power. Nicholas Chemin tells us more.
Ethiopians who can afford it are now buying fuel-driven generators. Many like this barber are tired of the frequent power cuts.
Even the so-called power rationing shifts are not predictable. Fortunately, I have a generator. I bought it with a loan. Those who don't have one have to close their shops.
The government says the rationing was caused by a drop in water levels at this dam. The deficit is equivalent to a third of the country's electricity generation. Ethiopia has also suspended electricity exports to Djibouti and Sudan that usually earn it $82 million a year. The authorities blame climate change for the drop in water levels.
Our contribution to climate change is minute, but climate change is taking a very heavy toll on us. We cannot understand the current problem outside of this context.
The economic consequences are severe. The owner of this internet center is worried.
The government should do something. No one is going to reduce my rent or my taxes because we're making less money because of this crisis. I might even have to close my shop.
The rationing program began in May and should end in July. Domestic consumers face blackouts for several hours a day, while companies like cement and steel firms have to operate fewer shifts.
Now, getting about by car in Kinshasa is notoriously nightmarish. The city of 13 million people suffers from a growing population and weak infrastructure. An average traffic speeds on the potholed streets is often well below 10 kilometers an hour. Well, some entrepreneurs targeting the country's middle class have tried to tackle the problem by making journeys, if not faster, at least more comfortable. Take a look.
Early morning in this part of eastern Kinshasa means one thing: another hectic rush hour. The bus carries all sorts of people, from businessmen heading for the city centre to students running late for their morning lectures. But like with many commutes, not everyone is happy.
We are stuck together like sardines in a can. There should be more respect for everybody's personal space. We have to stand up, so we're tired when we arrive. It stops us from studying properly. They should provide more buses.
An alternative solution for getting around this vast city is taxis and shared taxis, a distinctive shade of yellow that fills up the crowded streets. They must carry a registration number in plain sight, a measure imposed to crack down on would-be kidnappers. But even these taxis, which seem so numerous, have an issue with insufficient supply.
It's tricky at this time of day because people are leaving work, but hopefully I'll find a taxi.
With these travel issues facing the residents of Kinshasa, a handful of Uber-style startups are hoping to move in and fill a gap in the market. The most well-developed of these companies is managed by young entrepreneur Patricia. Her startup, Uber's Cabs, has a large fleet of vehicles across the city. One snag is the cost, usually somewhere between $10 and $40. It's out of reach for the majority of the local population.
The goal at the moment is to reach all social classes. We started with the middle classes, but we'd like to offer the same service but with different models of vehicle, to be able to cater to the needs of all the people.
Kinshasa is the third biggest city in Africa, with a population of some 10 million. And like many African metropolises, it's only forecast to get bigger in the coming years. And that means that the public transport situation will have to develop and continue to evolve.
Kenyan farm animals are eating well thanks to an organics company that's recycling human waste to feed to fly larvae, which are then feed used to sustain livestock. The unsavory origins of the menu is actually a green alternative to traditional methods of creating animal feed. Nicolas Chemin tells us more.
In Kenya, human excrement is being transformed into high-quality animal feed. Blue barrels are placed under these toilets of a Nairobi slum. When they are full, they are sealed and taken to an organics recycling factory. There, fly larvae feast on a mix of excrement and food waste. Then they are sold to animal feed millers who grind them into powder mixed with other ingredients to create a balanced diet for poultry, pigs and fish.
So basically, this process is able to reduce the amount of waste coming in by 70% within 10 days. So if you have, for argument's sake, 100 tons coming into the process, after feeding them to black soldier flies, that volume reduces to 30 tons within 10 days. Yeah? And that's a very, very powerful way of helping solve the waste reduction problem.
This farmer says his chickens have doubled the number of eggs they are laying since he changed to the new feed.
Yeah, before, the feed I was using before, it was not good to the chickens. The production was low. Many of the hens were dying. But after using the new unified feed, the chickens' production has increased and they've become stronger.
Harvesting insects is a greener alternative to traditional feed like soybeans, whose cultivation can lead to deforestation and the overuse of farm chemicals.
And finally, Cameroon is through to the last 16 in the Women's World Cup after beating New Zealand on Thursday 2-1. The indomitable Lionesses are through as one of the 4 best third-place teams. Ajoa Enchut scored her second with the last kick of the game 5 minutes into stoppage time. Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Take care.